question.
Everywhere. You got Facebook already?
Yes, I should.
Oh, okay. You log in as me on your Facebook.
Oh my God.
On your computer, you logged on. Anyway, hello and welcome. If this is indeed actually happening in live, and now we got a double echo.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. So sorry, obviously, we were having a little technical difficulty, as one is prone to do in today's all digital, all the time, Zoom-dominated world. I like Twitch better, though. So, I am John Boyer. For those of you that are tuning in on Twitch, and or on Facebook, and or on YouTube, and or on, I don't know, Google, I am the professor of World Regional Geography here at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies. And I threw together today a kind of informal, formal little lecture just on the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict that has dominated news for the last 10 days. And so I usually hold my cards on doing special lectures until enough students hit me up saying, hey, Boyer dude, what's up with this thing over here that I'm seeing in the news and I do not understand? And I had over 20 people, usually 20 is the number. So when 20 people ask me the same question or want some sort of a revelation or information about a specific topic, then I say, let's do it. Let's do a whole podcast. So, Katie, by the way, before you run off, how do I turn...
My phone, sorry.
Oh, your phone?
Yeah, my purse, sorry.
I don't know about that, but how do I turn on this?
Yeah. I'm trying to get this so it lines up better. Sorry.
Oh, I think it looks...
It's half...
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm working on that. If you want to keep talking, I'm working on it.
Sure. Well, I thought I was just going to start referencing. I guess before I go any further, since we've already had 10 minutes, a 10-minute technical delay, I should ask everybody if this is actually working at all. Can anybody see this? Can everybody hear this? You can't see a chat room on this right here, though.
I can over there.
Okay.
I just don't have it.
Yeah, so Katie's fixing things since we had to swap out some computers. That looks good enough to me. I'll go ahead and make that big, me small. You don't need to see me. I'm not quite that important. Although, what about this jacket, though, right? This is one of my recent acquisitions from Goodwill. So... what you may have been seeing in the news that 20 or 30 students had hit me up about. Just some headlines pulled from today. Destruction mounts as Azerbaijan and Armenia increase hostilities. Heavy fighting by Armenia around this area. And this is the all-important terminology here. The Nagorno-Karabakh. Karabakh. I don't know what that even means. In fact, nobody does. It's disputed the etymology of that word. But Nagorno-Karabakh is a certain little enclave located technically, legally, in a country called Azerbaijan. However, it's full of Armenian people. Armenian is an ethnicity as well as a state. So Azerbaijan's one place. Armenia is another place in terms of the states. They border each other. But Nagorno-Karabakh is a little enclave that's physically inside the sovereign state boundaries of a state called Azerbaijan. Heavy casualty toll has been increasing on this other news story because both sides, both Armenia and Azerbaijan, have started targeting civilian areas in this region, this disputed region. Obviously, it's a disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. I believe the death toll now exceeds 300. Given how spotty the news comes out and the mountainous terrain of this region, the death toll is likely closer to 500, and more revelations will come out as we learn more as this now 10-day conflict continues, because it's not abating anytime soon, it looks like anyway. You also have, can you go to the next slide, is it possible? You also have other regional players involved here. So that's why this story was intriguing enough to me to go ahead and tell you about it, because it does have impacts within the region. And I don't even cover this as a separate region in the textbook, but this, in the next edition of the textbook, in the next iteration of World Regional Geography, I likely will go ahead and pull out the Caucasus as a separate region. Right now, in most textbooks, geography books, world regions books, most folks just throw the Caucasus region in with the Middle East. I have long had a problem with throwing the Caucasus regions in the Middle East. I actually have a problem with throwing Turkey into the region called the Middle East. I've got a lot of problems with the Middle East, and the Middle East has lots of problems in and of itself. I didn't mean problems with anybody in particular in the Middle East. I mean the regional classification that we put everything from Morocco over to, in some cases, Kazakhstan into this big region called the Middle East. It's a very big place. It's got a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different peoples, a lot of different religions, a lot of different things going on. And to include way too much into a singular region starts to defeat the point of talking about the region or teaching about the region because there's too many exceptions. So that little spiel was to get you to know that I likely, feels like a test question if anybody wants to make this into a pop quiz, I will likely for future iterations of this class actually tease out the Caucasus region in and of itself. It's important enough to have its own treatment because it doesn't really fit in nicely with any of the surrounding regions. It's near Russia, but it's not Russian. It's again kind of in the Middle East, but it's not really Middle Eastern. So I kind of want to treat it on its own accord. And the reason that I felt that it was okay to do a podcast just on this little conflict, because it is little. You know what? If you lose a family member in this conflict, it's a big deal to you. But in the grand scheme of wars and even huge topics that are affecting the globe right now, this is not a gigantic deal to anybody outside the region. However, it has repercussions that could make it bigger. It could become bigger. Now, right now, it's basically a fight between two sovereign states. And Armenia is technically not even fighting in it, but they're supporting ethnic Armenians in this enclave. Okay? However, it has potential to spill out because surrounding power players have a vested interest in this. And this could conflate into something much bigger. Because, as you see here in some of these headlines, President of Azerbaijan tells Armenia, leave our territory and the war will stop. This war will stop. The president of Azerbaijan is basically saying, we're only going to stop fighting and shelling people when all the ethnic Armenians leave. And the follow-up response you see here in the other corner is from the president or prime minister of Armenia, which is saying, hey, everybody should start paying attention to this because Azerbaijan just said if ethnic Armenians don't leave, the war is going to keep going on, and that starts to sound like genocide. Okay, for those that are in the class right now, you know that genocide is a very problematic term because that involves world involvement. If it is declared a genocide, if it appears that it's a genocide, now the United Nations has to get involved to help stop a genocide situation. The other headline you see down here, Syrian recruits describe role of foreign fighters in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now we'd have not just these two sides fighting each other, Armenia and Azerbaijan, but we perhaps have soldiers of fortune even, mercenaries from the Syrian civil war that are being paid by Turkey to go fight in this war. And everybody's like, whoa, what the hell is going on? How did this little enclave, suddenly now you've got several states involved. And Russia has a vested interest here. Now you have 4 states involved. And Turkey is playing a wild card role in this. Now you got 5 parties involved. And you got Syrians involved. The United States and France have said, hey, we want everybody to calm down. This is getting out of control. So now you have international powers involved that aren't even in this region. Okay, that means there's something important going on here that we should discuss. The last little headline I have here, for anybody who's on the West Coast, you know this already. There's been protests in the streets of LA about this little war in this dink-ass enclave of Azerbaijan that 99.9% of Americans could not locate on a map if their life depended on it. That's enough cause for pause right there. People in LA are protesting because of a war on the other side of the planet. Ethnic Armenians in LA. So before I even go any further, I've already now thrown around a bunch of terms. I've said ethnic Armenians, ethnic Azeris, that is ethnic Azerbaijanis. That's two ethnic groups. But Armenia has lots of folks in lots of different parts of the planet. Most of them are in Armenia. Surprise, surprise. But there's actually a sizable population of Armenians in the United States. And that's why you're seeing protest here. And the United States is kind of friendly with Armenia. Russia is kind of the big brother for Armenia. So protest in the United States, yeah, there's a lot of Armenians on the West Coast, particularly in the LA region, and they're going out to take up arms, or at least to try to get the U.S. government to pay attention to this particular little war because it's important to them, and it's important enough to be making news in the United States. Therefore, it is important to the United States. There's this other little thing, which I forgot to even put in this slideshow, and that is Armenia has been for years trying to get the United States government to recognize this thing called the Armenian Genocide of Google that for me, Katie. I want to say 1918? 1918 Armenian Genocide. And that has been going on for a long time. And the same Armenian population... 1914. 1917 Armenian Genocide, which was during World War I, carried out by the then Ottoman Empire against ethnic Armenians, perhaps to the tune of 1 million people dead. Another thing that most Americans have never heard of, but ethnic Armenians in the United States certainly know about it. And they have been protesting and pushing for the U.S. government to recognize this genocide that they're saying Turkey did it, even though technically it was the Ottoman Empire at the time. So that's another tool or a lever of power that's in play in this particular conflict that, again, most Americans have no clue about. Armenians know about it. The Azeri know about it. The surrounding powers know about it. So let's get you caught up of, okay, what is going on here? What is this all about, technically? So I like to start off by at least placing you, zooming in a little bit on a map here, to put some names, and I'll probably show you about 5,000 maps here in the next 30 minutes. But if you don't have any clue, here's a good start. In the Caucasus mountain range, this very high mountainous range that separates Russia from the rest of the Caucasus mountain states, namely Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and others, is situated these two sovereign states called Armenia and Azerbaijan. They also share a border. Armenia shares a border with Turkey, and Azerbaijan shares a border with Iran. I'm sorry, Armenia and Azerbaijan share a border with Iran. So that helps cite it. They have a shared border, you see, but part of this border looks like it's contested if you're looking at this map right now, and it kind of is. But that's not the place they're even fighting about. They're not fighting about the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia. They're fighting about this province, this enclave, this little area within Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh. That's, I don't know, like, let's call it, 30 or 40 miles from the technical border between these two states. So that's where it is. Put it in your brain. Also look at this little Hatcher dot pattern that says that the dotted area within Azerbaijan is Armenian controlled. So that may be pushing it a little bit, but certainly Armenia has a decent military. Azerbaijani now has a bigger military. Hopefully we'll get to the last slide where I talk about why that's important. But technically on the ground, Armenia kind of controls at least the airspace, and militarily can control or repel invaders from that part of Azerbaijan. With me so far? Now to zoom back out, that was a zoom in just to show you the little enclave there, right? To zoom back out, you can see the whole states now of Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia up there, just a dink part of Russia hanging down between the Caspian and Black Seas. And this has been an area that has been contested for quite some time. Again, to zoom back in, just to give you a cleaner map of this particular area, you see that Armenia, I hesitate to say the Armenian military physically controls those dashed areas within Azerbaijan, because this is a very mountainous area. No one really controls it. But militarily, strategically, if you had to bet on who would be the first person to attack you if you were in this hatchet area? It would be Armenian forces, not Azerbaijani forces. All right, and the thing I've now mentioned several times, one other thing that's critically important to understand to get this whole story of why this is unfolding the way it is this is an exceptionally mountainous area. This is a high plateau, mountainous, craggy enclave that is important for those of you in the military sciences or anyone who's ever been a part of an invading force. Mountains are tough. Mountains are tough to fight in. Very tough to fight in. If this was all about one big flat plain, right? A flat plain area, let's call it Kansas, then it would be obvious that the military that had more people, more guns, more tanks, and more aircraft could easily just wipe out anybody on a flat plain. That's the way war kind of works. Usually numbers dictate the win if you take out physical environment. But wars don't occur in Kansas, not recently. So you do have to consider the environmental factors here. And the Caucasus mountain ranges, which divide Russia from the rest of, from Georgia and Azerbaijan, are anywhere, they're about like the Rocky Mountains. I'm sorry, they're slightly higher than the Rocky Mountains, a fairly divisive mountain range. We're looking at peaks on the order of 19, 20, 21,000 feet. It's hard to move armies across those. It's hard to do tank warfare across those. In fact, you can't. And so this little area, that's the Caucasus Mountains is the range I was talking about separating Russia and those other countries. But if you let your eye kind of float down to Armenia and Azerbaijan, these are mountainous areas too. But naturally, Armenia is all kind of mountainous. And this little enclave, this area of Azerbaijan that it controls, is kind of the same geologic formation. It's also mountainous. High mountain valleys and peaks that help separate things. And conventional warfare is just very tough here. It's exceptionally tough. And that's why this conflict has been festering for decades, because a small group of determined people can hold a mountain fortress for a very long time. Just ask the Swiss. They barely even have an army. But if the conditions are right and you can repel an army because of your defensive posturing, you can hang out there a long time. And that definitely, hold on here, let me say it close to the microphone so you understand here, definitely affects how long this conflict has been going on. The Armenians, the ethnic Armenians in this little enclave in another country have been able to basically repel the Azerbaijani military. That's why you've had this weird situation going on for so long. Okay, good, got it. Think about the mountains. It's important. Yes?
They wanted to know if Turkey recognized the Armenian Genocide or a similar situation.
Oh, dear Lord, no.
They said it's a similar situation in Japan in World War II.
Yes, the question was, do the Turks recognize the Armenian Genocide? In 2 words, hells no. In fact, it's a very big deal for Turkey. And Turkey petitions its NATO allies and its other world allies constantly to also not recognize the Armenian Genocide of 1914 and 1917. The United States actually has not recognized that genocide. Most countries have not. By the way, thank you for that follow-up question who just asked that. I believe that's part of what's going on here. And Turkey, I might not even get to the end of this lecture because it's probably going to be 3 hours long. But Turkey is suddenly isolating itself big time in the international sphere, in the international stage, because of its actions in this little conflict right here. And I'm predicting, feels like a pop quiz question, I'm predicting if Turkey overplays its hand here and continues to feed the fire of this conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which it has, if they continue to do it, you're going to start seeing countries recognize the 1917 Armenian Genocide as retribution against Turkey. So that's also going on in the background of all this. Turkey and Armenia, not friends. Go ahead and jot that down in your brain. Turkey and Armenia, Not great friends, not great buddies. Go ahead and write this down right next to this. It's also a pop quiz question. Who is big buddies with Armenia? Well, like I said, the United States has a solid relationship with Armenia. Russia. Russia is very good friends with Armenia. So when you start to think about how international conflicts work, you have to consider these things. If it was just two little countries who were having a territorial pissing match, nobody would care. Nobody would care. But if it's two little countries having a territorial pissing match, and one side has a very powerful nuclear armed friend, let's call them Armenia has Russia, and another one has a fairly sizable military local presence who supports them, that would be Azerbaijan and Turkey. Now you've got the makings of a bigger regional fight, and that's what everybody's worried about here. So I didn't even mean to get to this with this picture of mountains. We're already getting to the things we need to be talking about, which is Armenia has Russia as a friend. Azerbaijan has Turkey as a friend. Okay? A strong ally. Let's call them both strong allies, not just friends. Okay? So that's important to understand who's helping who, who's feeding in money or guns or weapons or soldiers into who. And it's already been shown, pretty much everybody agrees that Turkey has been very active filtering in fighters on the side of Azerbaijan. But let's see if we can get back to that in about 30 slides by now. So I can go through with this. I actually can move through this kind of quick, maybe quicker than I thought with as many slides as I have, because we've already fleshed out some of the bigger issues here. And that is, I've told you where the place is. You've seen it. Little something inside Azerbaijan that is mostly ethnic Armenians, okay? And now let's talk about that. What do you mean this ethnic somebody in somewhere else? The world, it doesn't work like that, does it? There's all these nice, tidy things we call states, and all the people in the states are just citizens of those states, right? And we all lived happily ever after. Said no one ever. That's not how the world works. And though we all recognize sovereign states as the international soup du jour of how we recognize territories in the 21st century and even in the 20th century, that's not the way that it's always been. International lines move all the time. They've moved as long as there's been human history. Different groups have taken over different areas. And it's not just a nice, tidy little packages that it's like, oh, this is Armenia. All the Armenians live here. That ain't the way it works, and it never has. So we do need to talk about the peeps and some particulars about them that will help solidify why they have the allies that they have, okay? So this is a language map of the Caucasus Mountains. I actually want to do a whole separate lecture just on what is ethnicity, what is race, what is ethnicity, what is it about the color of people's skins or this, how do we separate people, what is it about this stuff, and is there anything to it? I'll go ahead on and give you the heads up. Race is a total human construct. It doesn't really exist. I know you're like, oh no, but there's dark-skinned people and there's light-skinned people. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything, okay? Genetically, it means nothing besides you have dark hair. That's skin color. It means nothing to humans. Ethnicity is a little more important because ethnicity has something to do with more like a family lineage. Yes, maybe the people look the same. Maybe they have the same skin color and the same eye color and the blah, 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 blah. And maybe they do share some sort of genetic differences that are slightly different from groups around them. But ethnicity has much more of a geographic component too. So ethnicity, when I think of ethnicity, and the way I try to explain to people is when you talk about an ethnic group, you're talking about not just the group of people, but the place that they're from. And now you're talking history. So now you're talking maybe a little bit of genetics, but you're talking about that this group of people lived in a place for a while and developed their own customs and habits and rituals. And that's what makes them them. That's what makes Armenians different from Azerbaijanis. From a race standpoint, they're the same, because race is a made-up construct anyway. From a genetic standpoint, they're pretty much the same. But they have lived in their little areas and done their little things for long enough that they're different enough and they don't like each other. So this again is a cause for a whole separate lecture, and it's hard to even nail down as much of an enigma as trying to identify race is. Ethnicity is not much easier, although it does help that it has a geographic component to it. But even that's, you start to get muddied. You muddy the waters with, okay, like, well, here are these people here. What group are they in? Are they over here on this side of this? Or are they over, where are they from? And then people move, so that makes everything more confusing. Here's the best way to describe differences in humans. If you really want to be scientific and logical and not racist, then the best and only really thing you can look at is language. Because if you look at language groups, that settles it all for you. They, maybe they're not even going to have the same genetics. But when you say this group of people speaks Armenian over here, and these people up here speak Russian, and these people down here speak Azerbaijani, okay, that's something we can actually measure. That's something technical. And that's telling us something about this group of people, that they do have this background culture because this is the language they're expressing themselves in. So language is your best bet to try to figure out how to, I would say, categorize, group different humans together based primarily on culture, which is really the only thing that's going to end up being worth its salt in another 100 years anyway, is we continue to mix up and move everywhere. Anyway, language map of the Caucasus regions. I only put this up to confuse you because you can look at all of the different color codes on the scale over here and be like, holy crap, I didn't realize there was that many languages in the world. Yeah, you didn't, and that's not. There's like 600 or 700, maybe 7,000 languages in the world. These are just the languages just in the Caucasus region. And even that's too much for me to process. And so I want to kind of bring it back up one level, like I said, and be like, okay, let's talk about ethnic groups. And ethnic groups do have the connotation that they were from a certain part of the world, and they do share traditions and other things amongst their group. And this is a modern map, by the way. This isn't old. And I wanted to show this to you so you understand the complexities of the whole Caucasus region. As I suggested about 20 minutes ago, I think I need to do a whole separate chapter of the book and a whole separate lecture series on the Caucasus region, because it does not fit nicely into any other big regions around it. It is an ethnic bric-a-brac. It's a linguistic bric-a-brac. It's a hodgepodge. I'd say it's a goulash or a melting pot, but there's no melting going on here. These are distinct groups of people who are maintaining their distinct cultures, and that's part of the conflict that we're trying to talk about right here in Nagorno-Karabakh. So when you look at this ethnic map, just some highlights I want you to see here. Russia used to own all this territory, but not everybody here is Russian. In fact, very few people in this part of the world are Russians, even though Russia used to possess it and used to control it and still has a lot of influence over it. Some of the other places that are not Russian people in this area that you might have heard of are the Dagestanis up there, or the Chechens. Maybe you've heard of the first Chechen or second or third Chechen wars that Russia had to put down, a Chechen revolution. Those are folks that are technically inside the state of Russia. And if you look north of that border between Georgia and Russia, you see there's a whole bunch of different ethnic groups that are technically still in Russia. But Georgia is a country that is mostly Georgians. Azerbaijan is a country that is mostly Azeris. And Armenia is mostly a country that self-define themselves as ethnically Armenian. But again, now we're looking at the map a little closer, and I think I have a zoom in here. This is where the conflict really starts to become distinct, because as you can see from this map that we've zoomed in, the Azerbaijanis are in the green, right? So the vast majority of people within this state called Azerbaijani, and you can see it's a split state, by the way. Hopefully this map does not confuse you, because there is a chunk of Azerbaijan. Look at the green, just focus on the green. There's a chunk of Azerbaijan that is on the other side of Armenia. So already, now we've got issues of how the hell did that happen? We'll get to that story in the next 5 hours. But the thing I want to point out about this map, look carefully here. Most of Azerbaijani is Azeri ethnicity and Azeri language. However, it gets a little muddied if you look up in the north part of the region on that border with Russia. Oh, you've got some lesbic people and some Tats and some Georgians and some Russians up there in the northern fringe, because when Russia controlled this area and the USSR in turn controlled this area, they used to move a lot of people around. So there is other people in Azerbaijan. But the main thing to look at is that big red splotch. And that big red splotch, again, this is an ethnic map, not a national map. It's not a state map. It's an ethnic map. The big red splotch is almost 100% Armenians. Inside of 99% Azeri Azerbaijan. Okay. And it's mountainous. And it's a mountainous enclave that the Armenians have helped. And by Armenians now I mean the state of Armenia has helped its fellow ethnic Armenians next door help defend for the last 30 years. And that's what's at contest here. Azerbaijan is saying, hey, this is actually part of our technical territory as recognized by everyone on planet Earth. Most everyone. Armenia doesn't recognize it, obviously, but no major world power has recognized that that little enclave of Armenians called Nagorno-Karabakh belongs to anybody except Azerbaijan. Again, everyone on the planet except Armenia is saying, hey, we recognize Azerbaijan and its current territorial dimensions, and those dimensions include this area in red. Everyone's saying, no, that's Azerbaijan. We've all agreed that's Azerbaijan. However, it's mostly ethnic Armenians who have not allowed the Azerbaijani government to actually exert control. So it's one of those things that, well, everybody says that's Azerbaijan, but the Armenians there would disagree and say, no, we're our own state, or we're part of Armenia. And that's what the base of the conflict is about. It's a territorial squabble over who should control this area that's mostly Armenians ethnically, although it's located in a sovereign state called Azerbaijan, which, by the way, is mostly Turkic peoples. And that's what I meant to actually get to before I went to this next slide. Armenians are Armenians. They've just been there forever, okay? A long time anyway. The Azeris trace their heritage back to Turkic peoples. Turkic peoples, and you're probably confused already. You mean Turkic, like people from Turkey? Yes and no, because the people who are currently in Turkey, who are of Turkic descent, weren't there for a very long time. They all just moved in about 700 years ago. Turkic people are actually the whole line is actually from Central Asia. So you think about places like Uzbekistan, all the way to Kazakhstan, all the way over to Mongolia. This is the historic homeland of people we'd call Turkic. And again, I pointed out the language map because language is very telling. And all of the languages, Azeri language, Turkey's language, they're all Turkic-based languages. So Turkic people moved, again, starting about 1,000 years ago to 700 years ago to move into this area. Armenians had already been there. And now we can get to, okay, that's part of like how this conflict is unraveling right now, because I want you to understand, how did we get to this point that we have two different groups of people side by side who have two different languages altogether? And the modern languages are from old languages, but the language families they come from are terribly different. Their cultures are terribly different. And I am remiss, because here's another question, or test question I want you to go ahead and jot down in your brain, even if you're not going to take a test on this, if you want to understand what's going on here. The other thing I failed to put a slide in here about is religion. And I try to stay away from religion, but it's a big deal for a lot of people. So the other thing to think about right this second, by the way, am I still showing up on screen over there? My physical face. The other thing I want you to think about right this second is that Armenia is Christian. Overwhelmingly Christian. Yeah, I know. I just looked down. I'm like, oh, I'm not here anymore. I don't know how you fix that. I'll keep talking, though. You don't need to see my face. Armenia is predominantly a Christian state, which is part of the reason why it is aligned and has Russia as a very strong ally.
I might have lost it. No, it's still good.
Because Russia is an Orthodox Christian place. So that's part of the natural tie between Russia and Armenia. Okay. On the other hand, Azerbaijan, Turkic peoples, Turkic language, also is overwhelmingly Islamic. There are Muslims there. And thus, perhaps you put two and two together, and that's kind of why Turkey is a strong ally of Azerbaijan. And they're helping that group. So, sorry to have forgotten to stick this little piece in there, but it's quite important to understand the sides and who's supporting who, because religion is a part of it. Now, I won't even say it's a huge part of it. I don't think it is. But it does help firm up the sides. This isn't a religious war. It's not Christians fighting Muslims. This isn't a second coming of the Crusades. But it is important to help understand why the teams are so firm and why they have the allies that they have. Make sense? So Russia has historically been a protector and supporter of Armenia, partly because of its shared Christian ideology. And one could say the same thing about Turkey and Azerbaijan. The Russian-Armenian alliance has been much longer. The Turkish-Azerbaijani one, much more current. But, hey, sometimes time doesn't mean anything. It's how strong the connection is, and this is a pretty strong situation going on here. So now that I've added in this other dimension, so now we've talked about ethnicity, linguistics, and religious differences between these two groups of people and their allies. How did we get to this point? How did these very different peoples end up next door to each other in a high mountainous plateau area that they're currently bombing the shit out of each other for? Okay, I'll go through these fast because I am not a very good historian, especially about this part of the world, because it's very confusing. But as I suggested, the Armenian culture is a fairly old one. Everybody claims to be around forever, but when you start looking at written human history, yes, we actually have references to the Armenians, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. And old school Armenia, there's greater Armenias and lesser Armenias, but they had kingdoms and / mini empires that grew and shrank over the years. But I'm just going to go for the last couple thousand years. The area that you look at with where current Armenia is in today's world is kind of the center of what was a greater Armenia about 2,000 years ago. They were around during the Roman Empire. They bumped up against Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire after that. So these are folks that were recognized in classic literature, the old school literature, if you ever read any of that or took any of the classics. Okay? But now I can't advance slides anymore. Oh, I got to go back over here. I got you. Oh, I see now. Shared mouse. Got it. Okay. And I'm going to fast forward through history. Like I said, I'm not really a historian. But there's another player in all this that I haven't even mentioned yet, and that's Iran, old school Persia. So the Persians had empires that grew, ebbed and flowed, grew and shrank. Persia's been a fighter in all of the Middle Eastern contentions for a very long time. And indeed, Greater Armenia is absorbed at some point 200 AD by Persia, the Sassanid Empire, for those of you that know all your empires. And as I suggested before, we're talking about Persians now. That's the ethnicity of Iranians. So Iran is a state. Persian is their ethnicity. And Armenia is a state, and Armenian is their ethnicity. But we hadn't got to, well, how did these Turkic Azeris get here? And I actually did reference that there was a movement of people called the Turks or Turkic tribes out of what we call Central Asia, starting 1,000, maybe more years ago. It is kind of interesting that we, in the modern world, say, oh, well, Turkey is the home of the Turks. Obviously, it's named Turkey. So all the people of Turkic descent must be there, or must be from there. And it's actually the opposite. All the people of Turkic descent are from Central Asia, and a bunch of them came over. The Mongols came and wiped everybody out at one point, but there was a much slower, a longer-lasting Turkic movements of, I shouldn't say Turkic movements, but movements of Turkic peoples and Turkic ethnicities, of which there are many. It's not monolithic. It's not a Turkic ethnicity. There's lots of Turkic ethnicities. And it was movements of these folks over the course of hundreds of years that ended up in places, namely a place we call Turkey now. So they weren't originally even there. They ended up there. People didn't end up in Azerbaijan from Turkey. They came from Central Asia, moved through, all right, you can see on the map here, and every place north of India and even northern India, into northern Iran, into the Central Asian states, around the Caspian Sea, over to the Black Sea, and into areas of the Caucasus and eventually Turkey and beyond once they had this thing called the Ottoman Empire. Because the Ottoman Empire Before it was the Ottoman Empire, this whole area around the Mediterranean was controlled first off by the Macedonians, Alexander the Great, but then the Roman Empire. Well, actually, before Macedonia, the Greek Empire, then the Macedonians, then the Romans, and then once you had the movement of, I take that back, I missed a chapter. There was the rise of the Arab ethnicities under the Conquest of Islam and the Arab Empire, which grew around this whole area. So you had some Arab interludes that did hold power kind of in the Caucasus region. It was a fringe territory for their empire, but they did control big parts of what was the Roman Empire and spread Islam throughout this whole area that you're actually seeing as the Ottoman Empire. But the Arab, and that's an ethnicity, it's an ethnicity and a language, Arab ethnicity. So that group of folks took over some parts of the Caucasus region, but not all. And then the Turks then flow in, like I said, about 1,000 years ago. I'm very rough with my dates with history. About 1,000 years ago, you had Arab folks starting to float in there. And by 1300 AD, they were dominating the area, and actually the Arab ethnic groups were, the Arab ethnicity or the Arab Empire was retracting and was replaced by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turkish Empire, if it helps you understand the players in the game we're talking about right now. And the Ottoman Empire was around from about 1300 right up to World War I, where they really sucked. They sucked at fighting, and they sucked at making alliances, and they kind of lost World War I, and the Ottoman Empire crashed and burned. But even before that, the Safavid Empire, that's Persian-based, but was technically Turkic-controlled, but Persian-based and Persian-influenced, also took over. The long and short of it is that there was lots of different parties from lots of different entities and empires that control this area called the Caucasus over the course of the last couple thousand years. To get it up to technically now how the borders became as messed up as they are, we do have to cite a few things. Now I'll reference the Ottoman Turkish Empire, Ottoman Turk Empire, and the Safavids, Persian Empire. And there was actually wars between these two entities that I know very little about in the 15 and 1600s. That they were beating the hell out of each other. And at one point, everybody kind of retracted because the Russians were moving in. And this little place called Nagorno-Karabakh actually declared its own independence in about 1750 and was its own deal for about 50 years. So that's how entrenched this little enclave is in history. It's been overflowed by different groups at different times, different empires, but it even had a stint of being on its own for a bit. I'm sorry, you had a question over there?
Folks, just a couple different questions on YouTube, and
I'm ready for them. I'm ready for them with bad answers.
What is Azerbaijan is mostly Shia because that's Iran, or do you talk about that?
Yes, I wasn't even going to hint at that because that's a level of complexity that I didn't need to get to. But yes, Azerbaijani, if memory serves, is mostly of the Shia faith, which makes sense. Because I'm sitting here telling you that the Persian Empire, and again, I'm getting historical, and I'm not a historian, but the Sassanids and the Safavids, two different empires, hundreds of years apart, were Persian-based. So Persian, that's Iran. Iran is overwhelmingly Shia, of the Shia faith of Islam. So it makes sense that its areas that it used to outright control are also Shia-based, or Shia-influenced at least. Very good question. Where the hell did that come from? Again, that's a whole nother lecture. For those of you that don't know much about Islam, there are two major, there's two sects of Islam. Sects, not sex. Sects, like S-E-C-T-S, sects. Much the way they're saying there's two major sects, actually three major sects of Christianity. So you have Orthodox Christianity, you have Roman Catholicism Christianity, and you have Protestant Christianity. They're all Christians, but they're different sects. In Islam, you have Sunni and Shia. And Sunni is the overwhelmingly huge sect. 90% of people on planet Earth who are Muslims are of the Sunni variety. Only about 10% of the Shia variety. But they are concentrated. The Shias are concentrated in Iran and in Azerbaijan. And in a couple other Gulf states that play into current events that we need to do a whole different podcast on about Iran's influence in other parts of the world. But I'm glad you brought that up because Iran is plenty pissed about everything Turkey's doing too. I'll never get to all these slides, but Everybody is routinely attacking Turkey in the last 36 hours for inflaming this situation. Russia's not happy about Turkey inflaming the situation for obvious reasons, because they're friends with the Armenians. And Iran, who plays no role in this technically, is furious at Turkey because they see it as attacking or screwing with Shia people. And they're saying, hey, Shia people are dying because Turkey's fanning the flames of this, even though he's on the same side of the Shia. So it's a bizarre mess. What was the second question?
No, those are both.
Oh, okay.
And they're both asking that.
Okay, good. So now we're getting up to much more modern times, and I'm giving you the rundown of all these empires and competing ethnic empires, because it does help for you to understand how this little enclave got to be where it's at. To finish off the world tour of domination of the Caucasus, and that's the Caucasus is what we call this whole area around the Caucasus Mountains, including all these states. To finish off the world tour of domination of the Caucasus, the Russians and the Persians then go to war a couple different times over the course of 30 or 40 years in the 1800s. The first Russo-Persian War and the second Russo-Persian War. And Russia is growing in its worldwide influence at this time. So Russia, a whole nother lecture, which I'd love to do this semester, really grows from its 300 years straight. And it takes over the huge mass of Asia that you now recognize as Russia proper, takes over Central Asia, takes over parts of Eastern Europe, and indeed takes over this whole Caucasus region. And kind of went up to the border of the Caucasus Mountains fairly quickly, and then because mountains are tough, it took the Russians a bit longer to kind of wage warfare over it. And the Russians fought the Persians over this territory. The Russians fought the Turks over this territory. In fact, 50 years after these wars, there's Russo-Turkish wars in this area. So this has been a nice, tasty battleground for major empires for quite some time, and a tough one because it's mountainous. So the point of pointing out the Russians, and I'm not even going to get into the Russian-Turkish wars, but I do want to point out, because of this, is when the Russians in the early 1800s take over, and these little lines here are showing two different treaties that were drawn up after the Russians beat the Persians not once but twice. So the first one is the 1801 in red, you see. That's how far the Russians penetrated south before at the end of the first Persian-Russian War. And then by the second one, they took over at that Gulistan treaty border. They took over everything that is now Azerbaijan and Armenia all the way over. So all the black and then red borders, Russia controlled all that territory. And now we're getting into the modern era, and that's when we start talking about states. Now we start recognizing things called sovereign states. That's why it's important to understand the background. Because if you just say, well, Russia used to... Here's what all the news stories do, by the way. The news is so stupid. I mean, I love the news, but they're so simplistic. So all the news stories you're hearing are, oh, there's an ethnic fight in Nagorno-Karabakh because Russia used to control it, and then Russia left, and so these people are fighting. And you're like, okay, why? I've now laid out 2,000 years of history and movement of peoples and movement of religions in this area that have helped form up these opposing sides. And now I'm finishing by talking about, okay, now here's why it got as far as it did. Because when Russia takes over, when any big major empire takes over territory, it makes everybody play by its rules. So it can subordinate and smash any ethnic uprising, any religious uprising, any nationalist aspirations. If the Chechens want to say, hey, we want to be free, the Russian military comes in and smashes them. And Russia's a really big empire this time, so they put a lid on all of this ethnic fighting. They put a lid on religious conflict, and they put a lid on any nationality or ethnicity trying to rise up to become independent. That's what's important about the Russians taking over, coming into the modern era. They put a lid on all this stuff, even though there's been tensions between these groups in this area for perhaps hundreds of years, okay? And by the way, I love this little picture of Vladimir Putin peeking out from behind. So growth of the Russian Empire all the way into the Caucasus Mountain ranges by the 1900s. I even skipped over that the Ottoman Empire collapses at the end of World War I, although I referenced it. They side up with the Germans and are destroyed after they've already lost a couple wars to Russia. So that's why Russia ends up taking over more territory in this particular region called the Caucasus. And then, of course, the Russia is going to turn into something called the USSR in 1922. And I love pointing this out because the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, it's supposed to be like the United States. I think most American students don't understand that. They're like, oh, the USSR, Soviets, communists, so it's communist states, communists. Like, yeah, we got that. But it was a grouping of states who supposedly, like the United States of America. All these states said, hey, we want to join this one big superstate. So that's how they labeled their sub-states. So it's the USSR is the name of the state, just like we say the USA is a bunch of name states, but they're in this entity called the USA. The USSR is composed of lots of different sub-states based primarily on ethnicity. Look at that. We've come back to ethnicity again. And if you look down to the Caucasus region, so there's the Estonian SSR, made up mostly of ethnic Estonians, go figure. The Kazakh SSR, mostly Kazakhs. And you look down into the area that we're focusing on for this current conflict, and you have the Georgian SSR, the Armenian SSR, and indeed the Azerbaijani SSR, which if you look closely at the map and really put your head close to the screen, you can see that even back then, the Azerbaijani SSR was split between two different pieces. So the Armenian SSR separated the Azeris in two different locations. Does that make sense? And again, for people like, that's the craziest thing ever. How can you have a state that's separated, has pieces of land separated? I always like to point out, have you heard of this place called Alaska? Yeah, Alaska. It's not connected to us, but it's part of the USA, I think. Maybe Sarah Palin made it a separate state. I don't know. So, under the USSR totalitarian state of USSR, you don't hear much about Armenian and Azerbaijani friction because they don't allow it. It's a totalitarian state. And it's a totalitarian state, roughly. The Russian Empire was, no bed of roses for non-Russian ethnic groups. But certainly during the Soviet Union times, they're not going to allow for anything to happen. So, again, I keep saying they put a lid on things. You don't hear about these things. Tensions were probably building up. And indeed, even during this era, there were Armenian people located in this place called Nagorno-Karabakh. And the Armenian SSR sometimes encouraged people to go live next door in the Azerbaijani SSR in Nagorno-Karabakh. So the ethnic minority of Armenians located within the Azerbaijani SSR is not a new phenomenon. It's been an historic thing that just kind of played out over hundreds, if not thousands. Thousands is a push. 1,000 years. Call it hundreds to 1,000. We had these two groups. And ethnically, some of these guys were over here, and ethnically, some of those guys were over there. Not a new phenomenon. But no one really paid attention or cared because there wasn't any open fighting between the two during Great Soviet Union times. However, you all know that went away too. And now we're starting to get to, okay, why are these guys fighting right now? Maybe they fought 500 years ago, but we didn't know anything about it, didn't care. Why is this world news now? Because from about 1988, 89, 90, and definitely by 91, the Soviet Union goes away. It implodes. And it starts to implode when this guy called Gorbachev, I call him Gorby, when Gorbachev takes over, he sees the dismal state of the Soviet Union. Again, this is a whole other lecture I'd love to do for you sometime. And he institutes two things called glasnost and perestroika. That's supposed to be and, not an. Glasnost and a perestroika. And this means the glasnost and perestroika are terms he puts forward to try to fix the Soviet Union. And it's about openness and restructuring. He sees the old ways have not been working. The Soviet Union is going bankrupt. It's in dire straits environmentally and socially and economically and financially. And so he says, well, we're going to let's open things up. Let's have more truth and reconciliation. Let's open the books. Let's let people decide more about what they want to do within this huge state. and hopefully that'll help fix things. Gorbachev didn't do this because he wanted the Soviet Union to implode. He actually was doing it because he thought it would help it not implode. Unfortunately for him, it just imploded anyway, because once enough Russian people and non-Russian people were allowed to voice their concerns and allowed to do the things they want to do, many of the non-Russians said, we want the hell out of here. We want the hell out of Great Soviet Socialist Republic status. And that included ethnic Azeris and ethnic Armenians and ethnic Georgians and ethnic Estonians. So this is all, I'm being kind of nebulous about putting dates on this because perestroika and glasnost weren't policies that said, hey, we're going to do this and it ends tomorrow. We're going to do this and reassess in a year. They just said, we're going to do this to try to help the country. So there's no dates that this exactly happened, but because these programs allowed things to start to happen, in this particular part of the world, ethnic groups started to say, we want to get out of the Soviet Union. And, significant to our story, the regional Soviet Karabakh decided to vote its way out of unifying with the Azeris. So I've told you now, this is why I gave you more background, that the news skips over. This little place called Nagorno-Karabakh kind of already had Armenian people in it for 100 or 500 years. And it kind of, because it's located in the mountains, in a mountain chain that's closer and nearer to Armenia, and it's the same kind of geologic thing, has natural, cultural, and geologic ties back to Armenia. So even during Soviet times, there were Armenian people there. And the Armenians, the Armenian SSR, encouraged that. And when all of this openness and perestroika started to occur, the people within this little colony, let's call it, this little enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, they started petitioning to leave, period. So Armenia said, we want out, and Kazakhstan said, we want out, and Nagorno-Karabakh said, we want out of everything too. And as the Russians started to say, now I'm going to call them Russians, as the Russian government started to say, you know what, Kazakhstan, you can go. Estonia, you can go. Poland, we're not going to be in control of your country anymore. This is when the unraveling started to occur for Soviet Union. They said, okay, these states can go. But even then, when it came to Nagorno-Karabakh, that Karabakh said, we used to be our own kingdom, and we're mostly Armenian, and we want the hell out. We want the hell out of the Soviet Union. We also want the hell out of what's going to be Azerbaijan. And the Armenians in Armenia said, yay, we support that, and we recognize you. The Azerbaijan SSR said, oh, hells no. And actually, the Soviet Union said, hells no as well. And that's crucial to our story. Because at that point, the Soviet Union was allowing things to devolve on their own, but they held firm on Karabakh. They said, no. That's too much trouble. That's going to start a war. This little enclave, you need to go and stay in Azerbaijan. And by the way, the rest of the world agreed too. Even when Karabakh said, in fact, I've totally skipped over that they call themselves like Astrea or something like that. They have their own little kingdom name. And the Armenians call it Astrea. I'd have to go look that up. And so they're like, no, we're forming our separate kingdom of Austria back because there's historical legacy here. And everybody except Armenia said, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. That's begging for an open conflict. And the Soviet Union has enough on its plate right now. So no, we're not going to recognize that. You have to stay with the Azeris, okay? You have to stay where you're at. And now we get up to real modern times, and we're almost finished, believe it or not. Because this is an administrative map of the Caucasus and the USSR all the way up to 1991. It's in 1991 when the Soviet Union voted itself out of existence and 14 new states were born, including the state of Russia. So where there was one political unit called the USSR, voted itself out of existence, and 14 new sovereign states that we recognize came into existence. And again, Russia is one of them, but also Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all the stands. That's when that happened. So if you look at this map right here, you even see on this pre-Soviet Union collapse map, Nagorno-Karabakh is outlined. This is not new. It's not only not new, but the Soviet Union, aka the Russians, knew there was going to be a fight about this anyway. They just pushed it off until they washed their hands of it. They said, no, you can't go yet. We're going to make you allow everybody to become independent, and you guys can sort your shit out in the wash. And thus, we get into late 1991, when the Soviet Union is finally laid to rest. Again, in the Duma, they voted itself out of existence, and 14 new states were born. Many of them had already declared independence up to this point, by the way, in 1990, 91. But it became official at this point. And when it was going to the vote at the Duma for the Soviet Union to vote itself out of existence, Armenian forces actually launched an offensive to capture many of these villages in Karabakh in May of July of 91. So again, the news ain't covering that either. But that's partly why Azerbaijan has been pissed about this for going on 30 years now. Because even before the Soviet Union imploded, there was basically a territorial power grab occurring over this enclave in this mountainous region. Now do you get it all? Now do you understand exactly why these groups are fighting and how long they've been fighting for, and why this isn't a new news story? It's an eventual news story, because when you understand the world, and you understand just enough history, by the way, you don't have to understand every damn thing about 2,000 years of Caucasus history, but to understand enough about how these folks came into the places and situations that they're at makes it, I think, very clear that this war was always going to happen. And anyone who's in the region knows it's going to continue to happen until one side wins. Until either Armenia just physically absorbs this place and can defend it and gets world recognition, which, by the way, they have none, or Azerbaijani kicks out all the ethnic Armenians and or, hopefully not, genocides them, and or, hopefully, just settles it peacefully and allows people of ethnic Armenian descent to live in these areas. Until one of those three things occurs, there's going to continue to be conflict in this area. It just kind of is inflamed right this particular second. And why is it inflamed right this particular second? Well, it hasn't been quiet since 1991, when Armenian forces moved both Armenian people and Armenian guns into some of these mountain enclaves in Karabakh. There was another basically counteroffensive by the Azeris in late 1992. And so it was a protracted low-level war, 1992, 1993, 1994. A bunch of people died, but both of these were basically new states. So they've only been independent for a year from the USSR. And if you know anything about the USSR, it wasn't that well run. So neither were any of its SSRs. So you have economic issues and political leadership vacuum. And so while there was a war, a continued protracted small-scale war between these two states in the early 90s, neither of them were that powerful. So it's basically it's like watching two kids fight in the junior high playground before guns. All right, everybody's got a gun now, but back in my day, you used to have these things called fights. And you would just go, after school with somebody that pissed you off, and you'd fight. And so I liken that to the early 90s wars conflict between the Azeris and the Armenians. It was a scrap, but it wasn't major because these weren't big players. They didn't have their shit together economically or militarily for it to be a full-fledged giant thing, right? That's not true anymore, because now that we're looking at the conflict, we're seeing the headlines from the last 10 days are shelling is occurring. Shelling with Soviet-made weapons. I'm sorry, Russian-made weapons. Russia supplies weapons to both sides of this. They're winning, coming and going, I guess. But now they're bombing actual cities. So instead of a scrap in the hills, and fights between groups of people in mountain passes, now you have major urban areas that are being bombed outright, and buildings being bombed outright by both sides in this enclave. So it's gotten a lot more lethal. And coming back to where I started an hour ago, now you have outside players backing either side as well. So you have now organized states. Azerbaijan and Armenia are now 30-year-old states, and one could argue that Armenia has been around for 2,000 years, but in the modern sense of things, these are two states that are well-grounded. They've been on their feet for 30 years. They have political apparati that are functioning. They've been building up their militaries. The thing I definitely want you to understand is that 30 years ago, the Russians would have been more prone to allow the Armenians to do whatever they want in Karabakh because of that natural affiliated tie that I told you about. Christianity, and there's an alliance that Armenia is still really good friends with Russia. Azerbaijani, not so much, in the last 30 years. So Russia would have been more soft on the idea of Armenian aggressions in the area, which they were when they happened, okay? That's not happening so much anymore. Russia's still friends with them, but other things have changed. And here's the thing for you to understand and write down that would be a test question. Azerbaijan ain't no sucker anymore, and this ain't the playground in junior high. Azerbaijan has discovered a lot of oil. Or I don't know if it was discovered, but has taken advantage of a lot of oil resources they have in their territorial waters in the Caspian and in their lands. Azerbaijan has built a lot of roads and railroad networks. They have significant oil resources they have used to enrich their state, build networks to move that oil out, and they've gotten a little bit richer off of it. And what do you also do as a state when you get richer? You build your military. So the Azerbaijanis have had an economic outlet to empower themselves, empower their state, empower themselves, and empower their military. Armenia had a decent military to start with. And so they all, and I already pointed out, both sides are buying their weapons from the Russians. And the Russians likely, because they have an affiliation with the Armenians, probably sell them better stuff. I also want you to know this. There's a Russian military base in Armenia. That's not anything to just walk over either. Also, so the state of the game has changed for Armenia. They don't have as strong an ally in Russia. 20 years ago, they would have relied on Russia to come save the day and just beat the hell out of the Azerbaijanis for them. That's not happening. That is not happening. In fact, Russia hasn't even condoned anything Armenia's done, and Russia is one of the people suing for peace, saying, hey, you guys need to stop this. The Azerbaijani equation has changed because they've become much more powerful and more willing to fight, more bellicose because they have power. And the other big one that's also listed on here, the allies, is the Turks. Under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the prime minister of Turkey, or is he president now? Who knows? He goes back and forth every 4 years. He has become much more bellicose. So while we usually expect the Russians to be more of an interfering force in places like this, places they used to control, places like Central Asia, and Russia has been accused of being an intermediary and exerting its power in the Middle East in the Syrian situation. Russia gets accused of interfering all the time. They're not doing that so much anymore, and it's actually Turkey that has been doing much more to fan the flames of this, including perhaps sending in fighters from the Syrian situation that Turkey has been funding in the Syrian civil war, and they're pulling out those fighters in another conflict to go fight in this conflict on behalf of the Azeris. So this is turning into kind of a real mess. As I suggested to wrap up here, the world is saying, hey, can you all stop? The United Nations, of course, because that's what the United Nations does, came out and said, hey, can you guys stop fighting? Can we be friends? Can we just all be friends? And that, that routinely works. It's not working here for some reason. That was a joke. It never works. And the United Nations are joined specifically by France, who's become quite vocal lately, making fun of Turkey. France is under Emmanuel Macron. He is a big foreign policy power dude, and he is all about, he's visited the Middle East like more times than all other world leaders put together this semester already. He went to Beirut. during that explosion that happened there, and is making fun of the whole Lebanese situation and trying to help them. He's visited this site already. He's been to Iraq a couple times. So Emmanuel Macron is one of the first people that came out and said, hey, dudes, you guys got to chill the hell out. And he was joined by Germany, United States, and Russia. So most of the world's power brokers, I should say on the western side of the world, China doesn't really seem to have a dog in this fight, doesn't care. But most of the West and the surrounding areas are saying, hey, can everybody just stop? By the way, the United States, the reason that there are Armenians protesting in LA is because the Armenian Americans want the United States to step in and help Armenia in this. And they might have done that under a different president, but right this second, we're, a month away from a U.S. presidential election where the president has a disease. So the U.S. administration, I'm not making fun of Trump, pretty much any administration, 30 days before a major U.S. presidential election, nobody cares. Sorry to be blunt to my Armenian American friends, but nobody's paying attention. The United States is not doing anything with foreign policy right now. I take that back. There's one thing I want to talk about maybe Friday. But the United States is not really engaging at all of this because it's distracted with the election. Russia was expected to intervene, but they're hedging their bets for reasons that no one quite understands. And Turkey is therefore the only one that's coming forward saying, hey, no, we want to get in this fight. We want to help our side win. This is going to be fun. And I don't mean to pick on Turkey. I love Turkey. I've become less of a fan of Prime Minister Erdogan over the years. I used to like him. Now I'm like, oh, and he's been in power for 20 years. Okay. That seems typical for dictators. So here's a few headlines that I pulled up just today. Armenian Prime Minister accuses Turkey of reinstating the Ottoman Empire. Boom! That's why I try to bring in history. I know I could have done a 30-second podcast about this, and what the hell would you have learned? The same shit that everybody else is spouting on all the major news networks. So people reading that headline be like, what does that mean, reinstating the Ottoman Empire? You understand that now, because Armenia is saying, hey, everyone in this whole area should be worried because Turkey wants to reinstate its old empire in this territory, and they're doing it by intervening in the Syrian civil war to push its influence there, and now they're doing it in the Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict to push their influence there. Turkey is backing its Muslim/Turkic ethnic relations in Azerbaijan and perhaps reinstating the Ottoman Empire at the same time. The other headline, Syrians make up Turkey's proxy armies in Nagorno-Karabakh. And France accuses Turkey of sending Syrian jihadists to Karabakh. Turkey playing a destabilizing game in the Middle East as President Erdogan's role threatens world peace. I'm not sure where I got that news story from. That's a little radical. I don't know that it threatens world peace. But it certainly is telling us in the outside world who pay attention to these things several things. Oh, by the way, the story I forgot to stick in here. Russia, I'll say it 3 times. It's a test question. Russia has said that, earlier today, Russia said that it appears that the Nagorno-Karabakh region could become the next center of Islamic extremism. Why would they say that? What does that mean? I hope you know what that means, given you know what side of this fight they're on. So Russia is basically planting the seed of, if Azerbaijan wins this, then they're going to start supporting terrorism. You know, that's a bit of a stretch, quite frankly, but it's propaganda for a very specific purpose. So Russia's not entering the war except to sell weapons. But they're making it clear that they think this is dangerous if Azerbaijan wins it. All right? All right, and that then gets to what's the take-home picture to all this? Well, before I get to what I just put up on the slide, what you have that I want you to take away from this is a very assertive Turkey who's now making it quite clear that it's ready to break with its Team West affiliation. This should maybe is a podcast all of its own. If 20 of you ask for it, I'll give it to you because I could keep that one shorter than this. But everything Turkey's done in the last 5 years, including this, makes it crystal clear. They're not really that interested in joining the EU anymore. They're probably not that interested in staying in NATO anymore. They're not really that interested in doing anything that it used to do with all of its Western affiliates. The United States is a huge Turkish ally. It has been since World War II. Most of Europe is a Turkish ally, has been since World War II. And Turkey seems to be saying, meh, we don't care anymore. So Turkey is playing a much bigger and exerted role in Middle Eastern affairs, something I predicted in class over a decade ago. I said if Turkey doesn't get into the EU, it will turn around and focus its energies on being a bigger major power player in the Middle East. And it appears that I was correct in that assessment many moons ago. The other thing that is a take-home from this is that Russia doesn't want to get involved. I'm less clear why that is, given that Russia has a military base in Armenia. But Russia's got a lot on its plate right now and seemingly doesn't want to be seen as an aggressor in this situation. Okay? The other take-home, the United States is distracted. They don't even know where the president doesn't even know where this is and doesn't care. Probably not surprising. And then the other take-homes, and this is a much bigger picture here, because that's what I try to do. I try to bring it all back. This is the real meat and potatoes right here. Sorry to my vegetarian friends. The real meat and potatoes to this story is that it is a global trend that I've been tracking for a while as well. And that is we are witnessing a return to what I kind of call the good old days. Might makes right. We actually have not had a third world war since we invented the United Nations. And we all, since inventing the United Nations, all said we're going to agree to respect everybody's international boundaries as they are set after World War II. That appears to be slipping. And we are looking at more and more places are saying, well, that's what we've been doing since World War II, but I don't give a shit. I want this. I want this little area, and I have the power to do it. And the world's all chaotic now. And it's run by, increasingly by dictators and people of power who want to exert power. And I'm not making fun of Donald Trump. I'm actually thinking more of Russia's Vladimir Putin, Turkey's Recep Erdogan, leaders of Austria who want to close stuff off, leaders of Brazil who want to burn down the rainforest. These are increasingly blustery, strong, all white men who... actually, let me diversify. Xi Jinping of China, another strong man who said, abolish term limits, I'm in charge for life, long live China, long live me. So we are living through an era where strong men, and I'm saying that intentionally, not to be sexist, because they are all strong men, are taking over these areas and increasingly not really caring about the whole let's all be nice and respect each other's borders stuff. And what I mean by that is this isn't an isolated incident where Azerbaijan is now powerful enough that it's saying we're not going to end until all Armenians are gone, even if it's genocide. They haven't said that. But if you remember, the president of Azerbaijan said, this war's not over until all you Armenians leave. Well, that's not the way we've been doing things since World War II. We've all been nice and respected each other. He doesn't care. And he's got powerful allies like Erdogan who don't care either. Again, you start to look at these world leaders I mentioned, all of them have gotten into power and then thrown away all the rules for their country. I'm in charge forever. Turkey did it, Russia did it, China did it. There's other examples too. But this seems to be a worldwide trend, and I'll finish after I take this question.
Oh, sorry. You just had a student who took a class from 2005 who jumped in saying, do you think the Mediterranean conflict between Greece and Turkey is preventing the EU from declaring a side on this agenda at all?
Oh, no. The question do you think the conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean over gas reserves, literally who owns the Mediterranean Sea, and that is a fight between Turkey and everyone else. Oh, look at that. That news story feeds exactly into what I was just saying. So Turkey is definitely in an expansionist mode. Recep Erdogan thinks that he is powerful and no one's going to stop him. And so far, everybody's been nice enough to not. So Turkey is now involved in supporting a regime in Cyprus to take over Cyprus. Turkey's involved in multiple territorial conflicts in the Eastern Med to take over parts of the Mediterranean Sea because there's oil and gas underneath of it. Turkey has been funneling weapons and people into the Syrian civil war, and now Turkey is doing the same thing in Azerbaijan. So Turkey, by the way, if you're Turkish or you love Recep Erdogan, I'm not even saying, I'm quite neutral. I'm just saying these things are happening. I'm not making it up saying he's a bad guy. I'm saying he is a powerful figure who's thrown away the rule book and is playing things in an old school way, and that brings it back to the slide I've got on. Oh, by the way, the end of that question is that why the EU is scared to get involved in taking a side in this Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict because they don't want to offend Turkey due to the fights over the Mediterranean gas? No, the EU has made it quite clear the EU is one of the first entities that came out and called for a ceasefire. The EU has been fairly harsh in its critique of Recep Erdogan. I've already mentioned France's Emmanuel Macron. Macron has basically trashed him in a nice political way, but has countered Turkish aggression, if you want to call it aggression, multiple times in multiple news stories. Germany's Angela Merkel tries to keep kid gloves on when she deals with Turkey. And so she's much more civil and nice, but Germany is starting to harden its stance towards Erdogan's Turkey as well. And there are reasons for that are a whole different podcast. But the EU in general, I believe, is like, no. No one in the EU is keen on Turkish involvement in either scenario, and certainly not this one that has now 300 or 400 or 500 casualties over this little stretch of land in Azerbaijan. And now I tie it up by saying this might makes right mentality is kind of new. Now, again, for those of you that said, oh no, there's been lots of conflicts in the world since World War II. Yes, there have been, but they've been mostly local. And there's been a mostly international consistent voice of, hey, we shouldn't do this. And what I'm trying to explain to you all is that's going away. And with a lot more strong men in charge who are just saying, I'm just going to do what I want to do because I don't care about offending the world. I don't care what the UN says. What the hell do I care? We have troops on the ground and we can take this territory, so why the hell wouldn't we do it? And you're seeing it. I'm not making fun of Erdogan because they're not even trying to grab territory except maybe the Med. Russia. For those of you that don't know this, Russia basically took over these little areas you see on the map called South Ossetia and Abkhazia back in 2008. They played the same game. They said, hey, there's some ethnic Russians in these places. We need to go save them. And these are technically parts of the sovereign state of Georgia that Russia controls. I think that's why Armenia thought that Russia was going to come save the day for them and take over Nagorno-Karabakh for them. But they're not. So Russia's already played this game. Russia played the game again when it took back over the Ukraine. I'm sorry, not the Ukraine. The Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Peninsula was technically and legally part of sovereign state Ukraine, and Russia just said, we want that back. And so they just took it back. And it was like, oh my God, you can't do that. That's not how the world works. And Russia said, oh. Anyway, so that happened. And I also want to pull back in recent events of the last year of China reasserting control over Hong Kong, something it said it was definitely not going to do. There were treaties in place that said, China said, no, we'll sign this treaty with the British. Hey, British, if you leave, we'll make Hong Kong its own place for 50 years. And China just this year said, nah, never mind. We're strong now. Who cares? Oh, the world's upset about it. We don't care. Sorry, I summarize news stories sometimes, and that's it for that. Hong Kong's gone. It's not one state, two systems anymore. Anyone in Hong Kong will tell you that. China basically reabsorbed Hong Kong this year. And there's a world outcry about it, and China said, we don't care. And you can wait for it because China's going to do the same thing to Taiwan likely in the next 10 years. Likely in the next 10 years. That might be a much bigger deal because Taiwan's a much bigger place with a much bigger population, but China considers Taiwan part of its territory. And as it expands its power under its now one leader for life, Xi Jinping for life, there is nothing that would actually influence him except perhaps casualties to not just outright take Taiwan by force. I'm not saying it's happening today, not saying it's happening tomorrow, but this is a trend. And one could include that trend in what's going on in Israel right now as well, with their occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. As more and more Arab states recognize Israel and normalize relations, Israel is now in a position of saying, well, we've kind of slowly been taking over the West Bank. What happens if we just did it? Maybe we just do it. So I'm not saying that any of these things are going to come to pass, although the Crimean Peninsula thing already did. I'm saying that's what the trend is looking like in today's world. And this is partly due to a return of nationalism, rabid nationalism, where people are like, our state's the greatest state. Our state can do anything. We can do anything we want. Who cares about the United Nations? Who cares about international organizations? Our state is everything. And we'll do everything we want to with our state. Do you understand what I'm saying? And do you see evidence of that in the modern world? With territorial takeovers, with some of the current conflicts, including this one. Azerbaijan may not be a world power, but it's saying, we're strong. We're just going to take this. It's ours. We're going to take it. Donald Trump pulling out of every international everything. The kind of decline of any respect for the United Nations. This is a new world that we're kind of in. I won't say it's taken hold completely yet, but it's certainly been the trend of what's been going on for at least the last 5 to 10 years and is really culminating. So this little conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, a fly speck, right? Nobody cares. Who cares about that? It's a U.S. presidential election year. But it has the possibility of turning into a regional fight if Turkey pisses off too many more people, if Turkey ends up killing any Russian troops that happen to be in the area, if Turkish terrorists, remember, Russia said this might be a haven for terrorists in the future, and if any Turkish-sponsored Syrian terrorists who are moving into this fight end up hurting any Russians, now you might get Russia involved. Turkey has expressed its outright interest to be involved and doesn't care if it hurts anybody's feelings about it. And so now you're looking at, okay, this could turn into a full-scale thing that if it goes even 1 or 2 steps further than where it's at, it could then turn into something we label a genocide. And now you've got the world's attention and perhaps world involvement in the United Nations peacekeepers and crap like that. So that's why a little dinky fight over a little dinky place has potential to turn into something else. By the way, I don't think it's going to... I'm a betting man, and I wouldn't bet that this is going to turn into a regional fight, but crazier things have happened in the last 4 years, right? I mean, right? So one can never say exactly what's going to trigger something much bigger, and this one has that potential in an era that seemingly is moving in that direction where might makes right, and our state will do whatever our state wants to do, despite international disdain. Cool? That's why it's important. Hope you learned something. Does anybody have any last-minute questions in the 120th minute? Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Oh, well, you just fire them off to me. Let's see if I remember how to do this. I'll go, if I press this button over here that says full camera. Do I go, hey!
This is from Cameron, the map god. Why is Taiwan not like South Korea is to North Korea? Hasn't there been 2 different governments since the end of World War II? It's because China is P5. That's all.
I'm sorry, was that a one question or multiple? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's multiple questions from the same person.
So you're comparing Taiwan, China to North Korea, South Korea. No, that's a bad comparison. It's map guy.
Cameron, the map god.
Map god. Cameron, the map god. Yeah, that's not a good comparison, map god, because the Korean situation is very easy to understand. This is civil war. And it's a civil war between opposing political groups on the peninsula called the Korean Peninsula. The Korean peoples are one peoples and have been historically. And the Korean War, which led into a North-South Korea division, was influenced by outside powers. It was a proxy war. So it was basically the USSR and Soviet communism against the free world, America, whatever you want to call it, who helped the South. And once that civil war kind of ended, or came at a stalemate at the end of the Korean War, we've kind of been in limbo ever since. So it's one people's, one peninsula, a proxy war that ended up with 2 political systems. The China-Taiwan thing is much more complex because Taiwan is an island. It's separate. It's not physically part of mainland China. In fact, that's why we call it mainland China, and then Taiwan and its other islands. And Taiwan was not historically part of China. Now, by the way, if you're a Chinese citizen or a Chinese student, you will argue vehemently with me. And that's because your government has allowed certain things to be taught to you your entire career in K through 12. and China's very good at education propaganda. And they teach every one of their citizens that we always own Taiwan and we always own Tibet, and the Dalai Lama is evil reincarnation of the devil. And so that's fine if you're from China and you want to say, no, we've always owned Taiwan. In fact, China now claims the South China Sea, and the Chinese government says, we've always owned the South China Sea. And I'm sorry, you just have to go look at history to understand, well, no, you haven't. So just because your government tells you something over and over and over again doesn't mean that it's factually true. Factually true is getting a lot harder in today's Trump world, but we have these things called books and history, and lots of books from lots of different countries who tell history, and we can assume some things about what we know about our species over the course of the last 10,000 years. So China's claim over the South China Sea is weird at best. They basically say, well, the Chinese Navy reigned supreme in like the 10th century, and that's when we used to kind of control the South China Sea, so it's ours. And it's like, well, but you didn't control it for the last 1,000 years. So that's a little tougher to make that claim. Taiwan didn't really get folded into China proper, I think, until a couple hundred years ago. And again, I'm just an armchair historian, so I have to go brush up on my facts too. Let's call it 300 years. It doesn't matter. There's China, ancient China proper. Ancient China proper that started 4,000 years ago, maybe 5,000 years ago, was mainland China. China never owned the Korean Peninsula. China never really, not 1,000 years ago, even owned Taiwan. So to claim that you own this because you absorbed it during the height of power under the Manchus, I believe, a couple hundred years ago, well, sure, you can make that claim, but you can't say it's a claim over all of human history. And sorry, Map God, for going already too far in this direction. The claim on Taiwan is more recent by the Chinese government in its historical breadth. And then, much like the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan was kind of separated from them politically when China crashed and burned in the early 20th century. And so China hasn't technically been in charge of Taiwan now for going on 100 years. But it was always understood by many powers that, well, yeah, they kind of used to own it. So many powers kind of say, yeah, China, we kind of recognize that you used to own it and that maybe you'll, again, influence it. But China does not have direct power over it right now. China does not have direct military power on it. Could China take over Taiwan tomorrow? Sure it could. China's one of the biggest militaries on planet Earth. But it doesn't particularly want to do that yet. I'm suggesting maybe they're going to change their tune on that soon, because China considers Taiwan a renegade province that used to be part of them and then got away. And so they want it back. Taiwan, for a very long period of time for the last 100 years, has said we're independent and we're a different system. We're capitalist. We're a democracy. We want to be recognized. At one point, 110 countries recognized Taiwan as independent. That number has gone down to like 10. So it's a much bigger, complicated, nuanced affair that you can't really compare the China-Taiwan situation to North-South Korea. Does that make sense, Map God? Okay, other questions?
Are the big international players going to intercept Turkey?
The question is, are big international players going to intercept or intercede or try to limit Turkey? They already are with words. So as I've suggested, France has been leading the way, kind of, bitch slapping Turkey every now and again, and come out strongly against Turkish military moves. That's what I meant by bitch slapping. I guess that's technically a sexist term now. Turkish slapping? I don't know. I'm old, so I'm not exactly sure what offends who anymore, which is everything. You know what I mean. You know the spirit of it. They come out, Emmanuel Macron has made many poignant statements that he's not happy, his country's not happy with the direction, the bellicose direction Turkey's been taking on multiple issues. I didn't even get into Turkey also influencing what's going on in Libya and other places. That's, again, something separate. So the EU as a whole has been increasingly frustrated with Turkey, but has to play a bit of niceties with Turkey because Turkey has been harboring so many refugees from the Syrian civil war. So that's in the background of all this too. The EU kind of owes Turkey because Turkey's been keeping a lid on Syrian migration to the EU, and migration's been a big deal for the EU. So this is why they're in this delicate dance. They're really not happy with anything Erdogan is doing, but they also still rely on him because of the Syrian civil war and migration issues and a couple other things. But they have made it quite clear. The question was, are they going to actually do anything? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Besides perhaps severing some economic ties with Turkey, maybe sanctions if things get a little too volatile. If Turkey outright says, hey, we're going to take over the Eastern Mediterranean, yeah, there's going to be some sanctions. There might be some warships. There might be some skirmishes. There will definitely be pushback in the Eastern Med if Turkey tries to cement its claims over water. Will anyone militarily get involved if Turkey outright starts sending Turkish troops to Nagorno-Karabakh? I kind of doubt it. The only player that would possibly counter them would be Russia. And for, again, reasons none of us quite understand, Russia's been hesitant to weigh in on this militarily. Russia said we want it to stop too, but they're not. Russia typically is pretty vocal and will say, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to do that. If you don't stop messing with Armenians our friend, we're going to do this. But so far, Russia has basically said nothing besides, hey, everybody should stop fighting. So to answer your question, I don't foresee anyone getting involved in stymieing Turkey's regional ambitions for the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. I do see people starting to stymie their movements if they get more bellicose in the Eastern Mediterranean. Anything else? Okay. Well, our podcast on a very small little region inside of Azerbaijan has gone for 2 hours. Well,
1:36.
Well, and we did start 15 minutes late, so it should have been 2 hours. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like anything you see here, as always, hit me up. We did experiment for anybody who's hung on this late on a Tuesday night. It's Tuesday, right? We actually were experimenting to see if people wanted to do a extended news podcast like this on a weeknight instead of a Friday afternoon, which is when I do the weekly World Roundup. So if you like this at all and you want to see more of it, I will only do more upon request. And by the way, this isn't my ego that I need people to love me and express love for me. It's more that, hey, I'll do this stuff, but I'm not going to do it to an empty digital void. So if you like this stuff, you want to invite your friends and your families and click likes and follows or whatever you young people do. Like me and follow me to like me. Whatever the hell all that means. Do all that stuff. See? Subscribe. Like, I know that crap. Subscribe. If you would love to subscribe to me, to whatever station you're watching this on, where did that pile of stuff that you had here with the comic books and stuff? I just want to see some of the heads. I found these the other day. So anybody that wants to subscribe, I might could have some of these in your future. The Platyventure head. It's been found on stuck to various things across planet Earth. And of course, I dug these out of the warehouse the other day too. The editions of the Platyventure textbook, including the latest one from 5 years ago. Madness in Mexico, where the Platyventure goes to fight drug cartels. I thought it'd be fun to put up a swag market on here too, but we should also start doing prizes or some crap. I know, is that too old school where people give away crap? I don't know. Anyway, if you want more of this, you gotta let me know. You gotta let me know when. You gotta let me know the topics. And you gotta subscribe, apparently, not like. Don't like me. Subscribe me. That sounds dirty. Subscribe me. Thank you all. Love Twitch. Love the Facebooks. Love the Googles. Love the YouTubes. Haven't done anything on YouTube for a while. You all have a great night and chat it up in this box or email me. I'm at the same email I've been at for 30 years. JOBOYER at vt.edu. That's Joe Boyer at vt.edu. And as always, party on, and thanks for hanging out.